Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say, to those of you who are based in America. Welcome to Personality Yoda, our first episode of 2021, and we are so excited to have you with us. My name is Becky, and I am here with the Jedi Master himself, Mr. Steve Cockram. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm very well, Bex. Thank you. Yes, good to be back in lockdown. I think that's what they say, isn't it? Really, us poor Brits are back locked in our room, so we're doing our best.
We're on an official national lockdown. For those of you who didn't know, we're in a tiered system before Christmas, and then everyone went into full-on lockdown after Christmas. So, yeah.
In morning, you'll see. I think to my left, my golf clubs are sadly the golf clubs are now shut for the next 2 or 3 months. So, sadly, my classic first gear is no longer possible. So, I'm expecting lots of sympathy from lots of people, particularly you, Ray. So there we go.
Well, we'll see. So what's your first gear strategy now then in lockdown?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm at the moment I'm walking quite a bit more because we're only allowed out to walk. So being a true extrovert, I still tend to walk in the evening and talk to people. So trying to get 10,000 steps in. But I think learning as well that you can't have back-to-backs in the same way you would physical meetings. You run out of energy. So it's Friday. My voice already feels like I've done far too much teaching this week. That's mainly your fault for recording all the videos we've been doing. But hey, obviously being a true pioneer, I will somehow find a way to make it through. And usually want lots of public affirmation for my competence and just hardworking, sacrificial discipline.
You've done very well. We appreciate the sacrifice. I've worked him hard this week because we've been recording some videos, so hence why his voice is a little bit shaky. Yeah. But all good. So last year before Christmas, we're doing our series on influence. So we talked about the guardians and how they can increase their influence. We talked about connectors, and we also talked around nurturers as well and how they can increase their influence and how others who aren't those voices can help them increase their influence. Today, we are talking about the lovely, cuddly, humble pioneers, which we all love and may be able to speak to from a slightly personal perspective. Steve, in terms of questions around this, I've got a couple of questions I'm going to ask you, but as we're going along, people please do post in the chat any questions which you have around influence or pioneers or other voices as well if you want to add those in, and we'll be sure to pose those to Yoda himself and get them answered. So as people are doing that in advance of it, talk to me around the first question, which is what are the barriers to establishing trust for a pioneer?
Yeah, can you share my screen as well, Beck, so I can have that? There we go. Look at that. So that should be, for those of you who watched the other 3 episodes, should be relatively familiar. This idea of how do we win influence in a world where emotional intelligence is now more valuable than intellectual intelligence. That's a provocative statement, but I believe it to be true. So therefore, leaders are having to lead through influence. And therefore, we thought it'd be incredibly helpful for you to be able to understand from your foundational voice, what are the barriers to establishing influence? How do you do it? And what are the things you have to overcome? So the influence model really says that when somebody meets you first, what they're really trying to do is to ask, do I trust this person? And there are 4 sequential filters that I have to open and unlock, and they are character, chemistry, competence, and credibility. And they each mean different things. So character is, do I trust you? Are you a person of integrity? Chemistry is, do I like you? Do I connect with you? Do I enjoy spending time with you? Competence is, are you competent? Are you confident in your competence? And do you have a proven track record of success? And then credibility is, do you have the ability to take your competency, but to apply it in a bespoke way to the particular challenges that I'm dealing with, to make me feel that you've created a unique solution that really reflects that you've heard me in my situation. And you'll find that basically all of those are important. Some people want you to start with the competence and credibility, others with the character and chemistry, and we shared a little bit of those around voices as well. But today we're going to look at pioneer. And so I guess the question is, when you think about it, it's often easier to work backwards and go, for a pioneer for whom winning, competency, hard work is always part of their DNA, competency is never the issue. Pioneers almost would rather be thought of as lacking compassion than lacking competence. So most pioneers will spend a huge amount of time mastering the skills. They're usually quite clever people, quite strategic people. So therefore, whatever they want to master, competency is never the issue. Are they competent? Yes. Are they confident in their competence? Yes. It's very rarely that pioneers are not confident in who they are. And do they have a proven track record of success? Almost always. And they're very, very good at communicating their success in a way that puts people at ease. So that's not one of the issues. Credibility isn't either, because pioneers love consulting. Pioneers love that strategic challenge of taking competence, understanding the context in which they're being asked to apply it, and really creating a tailored solution for the individual. So pioneers are natural consultants. They love the strategic analysis. They love the fact that actually each context or each person or each problem challenges their intellect. So it's very rare competency and credibility will be an issue for pioneers. Well, now we come to character. So this is often a hard one, particularly as Bex and I are character, but are pioneers by first voice. And character is almost always the barrier to establishing trust for a pioneer. Now, some of you pioneers are going, but Steve, I'm a man of enormous integrity or a woman of enormous person, and you can trust me. And on the whole, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you think the character question is, do I trust you? Are you a person of integrity? And fundamentally, the question that people are asking is, I know that Steve or Becky or Pioneer is very competent. I know they will deliver what I'm doing, but ultimately, are they for themselves more than they're for me? So if you think of the question people usually ask without ever asking it is, are you for me? Are you for yourself, or are you against me? Now, very few people are actually truly against you, because you wouldn't really be having the conversation if you were. So the real question is to go, when I meet a pioneer, are you more for my success than you are for your own success? And most pioneers are very, very good at negotiating. And what you'll often find is that if the pioneer likes the deal, you'll find 6 months later that actually they somehow almost always have to win. So if the pioneer is happy with the deal, you'll probably find in 6 months' time that you weren't quite as clever as you thought they were, and the pioneer always enjoys winning. So whenever people are dealing with pioneers, the question is character, because pioneers often look at times, particularly young and immature ones, can look quite me-focused, quite ambitious, quite arrogant in the sense they're very confident in what they can achieve. And it's the me-centered, focused agenda of me winning, me achieving, me advancing my career, which sometimes causes people to go, do I really trust that you're for me in this solution? So character is sadly the one which pioneers have to work at most, because they have to get to a point where actually they're prepared sometimes to give more to the person that they're seeking to establish a relationship with. Sometimes I often say choose to lose in negotiations. It's a huge moment for most pioneers as they grow up. You don't always have to win, or actually by winning you can sometimes lose. And the last one is chemistry. So pioneers tend to be very, very task focused people. They tend to be quite abrasive characters. They tend to be quite opinionated, and they tend to like arguing and wrestling with complex theoretical models and possibilities and hypothesis. And, they'll always have a view and opinion on most things because they just quite like arguing. So chemistry works up to a point. So when somebody is like them, they love them. When somebody is enjoying the intellectual sparring, the chemistry will work. Or where actually we're working on the same team together, and the pioneer is actually good to be with because they're always helping us win. But there are always certain characters like your nurturers or some of your more values-driven creatives and feelers who sometimes go, yeah, I like you, but I kind of find you hard work because you don't look at the world the way I do. And I sometimes find it hard to be around somebody who is always so competitive, or always seems to want to be the person whose opinion wins, and really struggles at times just to kind of go, do I like you? Do I enjoy spending time with you? Those are the things where, so if you look at it, when it says your question there, Bex, what are the barriers to establishing trust for a pioneer? and trust is the foundation of relationship, which is the context for influence. Competence and credibility, green tick, we're good to go. Character is always the one which is the most difficult, and chemistry, pioneers, you have to work at and be sensitive to the environment and the people and the different voices that you're around, because not everyone views the world the way you do. In fact, only 7% of the people in this world look at the world through the lens of the pioneer. It's the least representative voice by personality, but often one of the most influential, and certainly the most voice that you'll find often in senior leadership roles, because they love that responsibility. So there's a quick overview, Bex. I hope that's helpful. Of, for a pioneer, the main barriers to establishing trust, sadly, are in the issue of character and sometimes in the issue of chemistry.
That is so helpful. Is it the same for all pioneer voices? So obviously you've got the pioneer connector, pioneer creative, pioneer guardian. Is character and chemistry the same for all of them?
It's a very good question. I'm not sure how I answer it in such a short period of time. So the second voice always shapes. So the pioneer connector will always be a little bit more of a charismatic salesperson, because in some senses they know how to be strategic and connect with people. So in some ways they can often get away with it, but they're the ones that really have to watch that trustworthiness, because their desire to win often mean they will cut corners and use charm as they perceive it and ingenuity to finally get themselves across the line. You'll usually find with the pioneer guardian and with the pioneer creative, because they are much more systematic and structured in how they communicate, connector is less. There is less charisma trying to sell things. It's more, they are often much more intellectual in the way they engage with the world. So sometimes character may be slightly higher for them, but chemistry is often lower, because in some ways people find it really hard to engage with someone at times who doesn't give much away relationally, is very, very task focused, and is often doesn't know how to waste time with people. So the pioneer connector is really the more relational entrepreneurial version of the pioneer world, and they'll enjoy being strategic and meeting new people. The pioneer guardian particularly finds it very hard to know, why would I waste time in any environment if I don't have a strategic objective that I'm achieving? And the pioneer creative, of course, is the introvert version, and so therefore they have a very low need for more people, and they only tend to allow people in who they deem to be intellectually competent and worthy of their engagement. So it's almost like, the pioneer connector desires connection with more people because they're more of a networker. So therefore they'll work a bit more at the chemistry piece, but they have to be very, very careful that they don't end up enjoying winning too much at negotiation or manipulation, dare I say it, of moving people around so that actually they're doing things which serve them, even if it looks to the outside world like they're doing it altruistically. I'm speaking to myself here, Beck, so I hope this is, if I look back at the young me and the tendencies I had as a pioneer connected creative, I love the fact everyone thought I was a ruthless negotiator when I was 30. Nobody wanted to negotiate with me because I loved it. It was like intellectual chess. Little did I realize at the time that actually that undermined my influence with people, not because they didn't like me, but they never really wanted to go through that negotiating piece. And my insecurity as a pioneer meant I was always trying to prove my competency. And as I've shared, I think a number of times at different episodes of the Personality Yoda, in every organization, there is always the moment when the CEO we're working with looks at me and goes, Steve, this is so helpful. I've got a problem. It's usually male, by the way. We'll come on to the gender issues for pioneers, because I think women have different issues and dynamics on this specs, which we'll come to. But there is almost always that moment in early career, usually between the age of 28 and 34 was my rule of thumb, where everybody kind of knows the pioneer is competent, but they can't seem to move their career forward any further. And usually what happens is I say, look, I'll help them. They're like, really? You can help me make a bet? I said, absolutely. I know exactly what to do. I bring them into a room with me. They feel like they've been selected for special development, so they think that's good. And I said, get your pen out, get your paper out. They're like, yep, okay, all they're typing. And I say, write this down, because this is going to change your life forever. And I go, no one likes you. no one likes you. They're like, what do you mean no one likes me? I said, all of your peers believe that you are more for yourself and your team than you ever are for them and their success. Therefore, you are trying to prove that you are the most competent at your level with your team. Your team love it, but all your peers see you as basically being me orientated and competing even internally. So in the end, the moment your peers believe that you, as the young pioneer, will use your skills and your expertise and your networks to help them win, then they will be more than happy for you to be promoted and be their leader. But they will rather have anyone but you until you, as the pioneer, actually realize that you're competing to prove something that everyone knows, that you're the most competent. But you're doing it in a way which is undermining your influence because people see you as being insecure and actually competing against your own team, which is never particularly attractive in someone you'd promote to lead. So there you go, Bex. Give us anything you want to come back on that one, but that's just a free one for young pioneers out there. Or if you happen to be leading an organization and you have one of those young pioneers, teaching them to understand why character and choosing to serve others rather than compete with others is usually the way towards career advancement.
Yeah, I think it's a huge learning curve. When I was in my early career, I couldn't understand why people didn't want to compete. When it's driven, I was like, let's go do this. And understanding this framework is so helpful as a pioneer to understand why winning isn't the primary driver for most people. Debbie says, yes, she has a few clients who are different versions of pioneers. And she says she absolutely sees the differences, which you've been speaking around with them. On the transaction level as well, I've got a really good question here from Brian, which says, what advice do you give a pioneer connector trying to gain that intellectual and nurturing voice, especially when they notice that people are already withdrawing from that conversation?
Interpret that question for me, Bex. I'm not entirely sure what it means. So he's a pioneer connector trying to gain intellectual and nurturing voice. And who's withdrawing? So they're trying to gain influence with the nurturer when they're actually the nurturer appears to be withdrawing from the conversation. Is that fair?
Correct.
So firstly, Brian, the fact you've recognized that is we're halfway there, because most pioneers just assume everyone is like them. They're just not as competent. That's usually the default understanding of the average young pioneer. The moment they begin to understand that there are incredible differences that can be celebrated in different voices, and the nurturer is obviously the nemesis voice to the pioneer. It's the one they find most difficult. So if a pioneer is just naturally pioneering with all those natural tendencies, you will actually find it difficult to gain influence with nurturers. So what you have to do is, I say there's a duty of care based on the power of your voice. So if you think of the 5 voices tool, you'll have pioneer, connector, guardian, creative, nurturer. Pioneer is the loudest voice, not just by volume, but by force of opinion. And that's the important thing to understand. So when you're trying to win influence with a voice that you are more powerful than in terms of forcefulness, you're the one who's going to have to choose your action, which is not natural to your tendency. So for pioneers, I would start to ask good questions. And the other thing I would do is I would make sure, Brian, that the voices, vocabulary, and language is in the water system. So what you can do then is to talk to your nurturer and say, look, I know that when I'm just me, it will cause difficulty because of my competitiveness, because of my apparent ambition. I want you to know that I'm really committed to trying to understand and learn from the wisdom and the expertise you bring. And nurturer, would you help me do that? I can't promise that I'll get it right every single time, but I want you to know that I see what you bring and I want you to help me grow. So the moment the pioneer connector, or any pioneer really, models humility and models self-awareness and understands that them and their weapon system have to be very careful, and the forcefulness of their opinion is learning to celebrate the other voices like a nurturer here, and more importantly, choosing to listen and to begin to understand that sometimes your humor at times can often upset nurturers. And it's really asking them, teach me, how do you see this situation? I really want your wisdom, your expertise to shape how the team or the family is actually running. And in my experience is the moment the nurturer sees progress, they will credit you as a pioneer with that. What they want to see is they want to see humility, they want to see sensitivity, and they want to see a degree of empathy that you understand that the whole world doesn't look like you do. And at that point, the nurturers will give you the best they have. You just have to be incredibly careful when they say something that you disagree with, when your default tendency is to get the grenade out and start an intellectual fight with, grenades, to realize that the moment you do that, that nurturer will never ever share that again. So you need to put your safety on. You need to be consciously competent, which is why the chemistry piece is often a shame, because pioneers often have to be on their best behavior around nurturers. The moment you become accidental, you usually get it wrong and you usually don't know why. So I hope, Brian, that's helpful.
Yeah, I've got some really good questions coming in here, so I'm going to pose it straight to you. Derek says, is there a voice that pairs best with Pioneer or Pioneer Connector in a work environment versus a social justice environment?
So the honest answer, Derek, is the moment you start thinking about how do I build an invincible team. So Giant has really moved with the industrial into the digital world to say the most important skill set is not being a highly talented individual anymore. The most important skill set is, do I know how to build high-performing invincible teams? And the only way that I know pioneers and pioneer connectors, as I know you are, Derek, can do that is by actually ensuring that in their teams and decision making, they actually honor and listen to all of the voices. So in a sense, you always find it easier to connect with people that are like you. So pioneers will often find it easier to connect with other pioneers. They'll usually connect well connectors because they're often big picture people that want to change things. The real challenge for the pioneer is, can you really create an environment where particularly the nurturers and the guardians feel that they are truly team with you? When you can do that, you'll love working with them in a work environment. Social environment, Derek, most pioneers, if we're honest, like hanging out with other pioneers because they don't have to filter all their engagement. So if you think about it, most of the time as pioneer team leaders, we're on our best behavior, trying not to let our default tendencies upset other people. So therefore, at times, we almost go, oh, in my social world, I would so love just to be an environment where I don't really have to think about offending somebody. And so therefore, you'll often find that pioneers who often love to just talk about work and strategy anyway, even in their social environment, it's easier for them. Whether it's good for them or not, Derek, I don't know. But I'd start with the conscious competence in your team and just be aware that actually, even if you have close friends who are pioneers, not to become elitist or arrogant, because there is so much to learn from being around and having friends who look at the world differently to you. But it is more difficult because they don't see the world quite like you do.
Yeah, so true. So good. Okay, I've got another question here, which ties on very nicely in terms of that conscious competence. How do you teach pioneers, this is from John, how do you teach pioneers the importance of third gear and socializing with people just to spend time with them and be present? If he says he finds that if they don't find the subject interesting, they don't often engage in third gear.
So John, again, this is where I think some of the different types of pioneer. So pioneer guardians, okay, so ENTJ in myers-briggs language, have connector as their fourth voice in the voice order. And so therefore, for the pioneer guardian, if you think guardian is, connector is 4 and nurture is 5. So therefore, the fourth voice is what we call the unconscious incompetence. We usually think we're better at it than we actually are. So there are certain pioneers who really find third gear hard work, and the pioneer guardian will be number 1. Pioneer creative will be number 2, and the pioneer connector quite enjoys it because in some senses the connector is high. So the connector voice usually gives you an indication of how easy third gear will be. Now, if you think about it, if you can teach a pioneer that mastering third gear is going to help them be more successful in what they're trying to achieve, it's a terrible motivation. So every nurturer and connector out there is going, Steve, really, you've got to make it a competitive sport for a pioneer to bother learning how to do third gear and connect with people. And I go, well, let's be grateful we're working on our things. So, and then getting to the point where they understand that it's not only helpful, but it's usually where relationships begin. Because for a lot of pioneer guardians and pioneer creatives, wasting time with people is not something that, without an agenda that is strategic, often feels like, well, why would I do that? Versus the understanding that I think the Pioneer Connector has more, which is actually I'm with people because networking and building relationships and collaborating is actually a foundational piece of leadership in the new world, where you can no longer lead purely through intellect. You have to be able to connect, and you have to be able to influence. So that's why the influence model is so important. And in many ways, third gear is often the place where chemistry is tested in the beginning. So yes, you're very competent, I could work with you, but am I going to enjoy spending time with you if I'm going to be working with you as a partner or a subcontractor for maybe the next 6-12 months on a project? That chemistry piece becomes quite an important consideration. So definitely one for pioneers to realize, okay, most pioneers have to get logically to the point where they go, I need to get better at third gear because, and they need their bullet point list of the reasons why it's going to help them win. And then, of course, it goes into their, I will master this skill set, even if it's a bit clunky in the beginning. And if you read the 5 Gears book, there's a whole chapter on, 20 questions to ask in third gear. So you can learn how to become more effective in third gear. But in my experience, most pioneers need a rationale, which is strategic, for them really to begin seeing that as a priority for learning.
Playing to this pioneer sense of competition there. I love it. Also got another great question here from James. He says, Happy New Year. How do you challenge a pioneer without questioning their competence, which they don't like? Or do you question their competence?
James, very, very good question. I think it depends what your voice is. So if you're a fellow pioneer, then challenging another pioneer is okay, because if they grenade you, you'll grenade them back and it's fine. But the honest answer is, for most people, bringing challenge to a pioneer is actually something you have to work at, because the default, if you're challenging competency, is they will react with a defensive justification. So the Pioneer Connector, by the way, is the world's best at, whenever you bring a challenge or a critique to them, by the time they've listened to it, engaged with it, and brought it back, often it ends up with you feeling it was your fault and not theirs. So the ability to spin their way out of any form of challenge, or to turn it around and make you feel bad for even bringing it, is really high. So what I always say to people is, make sure the voices, vocabulary and language is in the water system. And also what we would call support and challenge. The one you'll have come across this before. High support and high challenge. And then what you do, James, is you go to the pioneer and say, hey, Mr. Pioneer or Miss Pioneer, I would love to be a liberating influence in your life. I'm trying to learn how to bring high support and high challenge, but I'm only going to do it if you give me permission to do it and invite it, and also be cognizant of your tendency, which will be to blow me up if you instinctively disagree with what I say. So in some ways, using a bit of disarming humor and the tools to do the heavy lifting, because most pioneers desperately want to grow and become more competent. Most of them are unconsciously incompetent, James. So if you frame it, if you said to me, Steve, I'd love to be a liberating leader. I really want to learn how to do high support and high challenge for you, but I'm aware that if you're not careful, you may react negatively and blow me up. Are you still wanting this? The moment I say, yes, James, I'd really love it, bring the challenge. And then you say, but the deal is, please be careful how you engage with it. So I'll often say to pioneers, if I'm bringing a challenge to them, don't react in the moment to the challenge, because your defensiveness puts people off doing it in the future. If somebody is brave enough to bring challenge to you as a pioneer, there is something in it that is really, really valid. It may be that only 30 or 40% of it is valid, but your defensive justification about the bit that's not or actually stop them doing it in the future. So that's the way I would frame it, James. And I would call the pioneers up to go, please, as I give you this, do not react in the moment. I don't want to fight with you over it. I'll do clarification, but I want you to go away and think about it. So for me, as a pioneer, I've learned that if somebody is brave enough to bring challenge to me, I have to welcome it, embrace it, thank them for it, not try and justify myself, and not try and become defensive and go, thank you, I'm going to go away and reflect on this, but I'm really grateful that you love me enough to want to bring that challenge, because I know it's not easy to challenge pioneer, particularly if you don't happen to be a pioneer when I'm sat there in Kevlar body armor and a grenade launcher ready to kill. So great question, James. I hope that was helpful.
Really good question. I think the important thing is to remember as well is that pioneers can deal with a bit more challenge without even necessarily realizing that someone else is bringing challenge. So what might feel like if you're a nurturer and you feel like you're bringing challenge, a pioneer might not necessarily have clocked that it is a challenge, which has happened to me before in past situations. Awesome. We have a couple of minutes left. And so, Steve, I'd love to progress through the influence model and continue with in terms of how pioneers can establish their influence. So in terms of overcoming their wall of self-preservation, what tips and recommendations do you have with that?
So for pioneers, the tool is so helpful because it describes usually why they don't get there. Because pioneers love to win, and therefore a transaction often feels like a win. So often what they'll do is they'll settle for establishing trust to win a business transaction, because they themselves are not naturally wired to understand why relationship is so much more important. So the wall of self-preservation for a pioneer is usually about humility and vulnerability and being prepared, I often say, to boast in my weakness. So that is totally counterintuitive to the young pioneer who's desperately trying to prove how competent they are and compete with everybody. Self-preservation wall is actually being prepared to be vulnerable, being prepared to sometimes I often tell self-depreciating jokes that make me look small. But what I'm really doing is saying, how do I position myself so that actually I am in a position where somebody wants a relationship with me? So I know myself, I know my tendency to work, and I'll often try and make sure, how do I create space depending on the wiring of the other person that I know now? What is it they need to feel a relational connectedness? So again, the maturity is constantly at times as a pioneer having to think, how do I create the environment where the other person feels able to withdraw their wall of self-preservation as well? And also, how do I do relationship well when my default under pressure is to resort back to transaction? So if you think the pioneer is so wired for task, achievement, and getting the job done, what you'll often find is with the pioneer is if they're not careful or they're stretched or pressurized, they will forget to invest in the relationship and they will move back into functioning in a client provider relationship. So it's almost like you have to keep investing in the relationship, but depending on how the other person is wired. So if the other person is a pioneer, then to be quite honest, it'll be fine. But when you're dealing with people who are different to you, you have the duty of care to create the environment where that relationship flourishes, because you carry more tools, but you're also slightly more frightening to engage with. So that's what I would just say. But just to keep saying is, if in the new world, relationships are the currency of wealth and influence. So just being clever and winning transactions is never going to actually get you to the fulfillment of your potential, which is every pioneer's dream. You're going to have to learn in the new world, how to lead people who are not as competent as you, not as driven as you, not the same as you. You're going to have to build collaborative networks inside your organizations. You're going to have to build networks of influence outside of your organization. And that will only happen if you learn how to not only bring your own wall of self-preservation down, but to position yourself in a way that not only causes someone else to lower it, but to keep it low, rather than just think, oh, I was used. Because what often happens is pioneers forget about the relationship once they've got what they want, and they resort back to transaction. And some of the more relational personalities and voices go, well, hang on then, was I just used? You know, the moment the deal's over or the moment the work's over, it's just you disappeared. And pioneers always have to work at how do they keep maintaining relationships that are not at the center of their task world.
That is so helpful. I think you just answered my last question as well, which is how do pioneers preserve long-term influence and impact? And so really being intentional about relationships and sustaining those. Any other top tips you'd like to add to that?
I think the key thing for me is to go, pioneers will gather lots of people along the way. It's almost inevitable. And they won't automatically think of investing in relationships that are not in their immediate team or their immediate target, what they're trying to achieve. So I know it's horrifying, nurturers, and please forgive me, but I will often I do have a spreadsheet with 100 names that I review every year, and I actually allocate them to different orbits. So what it does is it reminds me, if somebody's in my 3 or my 12, then I'm probably going to interact with them daily or weekly. The further out I go, monthly is probably about right. So I'm giving away all my secrets for those who are watching, but it's not that I don't care about people. It's if I don't create a structure or plan for dealing with it, I can go a long time because they're not in my immediate world and I've forgotten them. And I found that diminishes my influence. So what I'll often do is I'll often text because I find that easier and more personal than email. And I'll often send, hey, would you love to get a quick catch up? And I'll send them my Calendly link with a 30-minute offer in it. So I try and make sure that probably most people, in my observation, can maintain about 70 relationships really well. So the trouble is, if you've got lots and lots and lots of them, then actually it's more difficult. And obviously I realize as well, the Pioneer Connector finds that easier than the Pioneer Creative and particularly the Pioneer Guardian, because you undermine influence when people think that you've been disingenuous in the original transaction and relationship. And then they're back to questioning character again, which is, oh, so Steve was incredibly charming when he wanted something. And I thought we were really close because we went out and did all kinds of things together. And the moment the contract stopped, I've not heard from Steve. And that's not because I've made a conscious decision to do it, but it's because they're not at the center of my task focus. What am I trying to win? What's my vision? So that's one of those, what I call peripheral visions. How do I keep in the periphery of my vision the people who are actually really important and actually need to know that I care about them even when they're not helping me win in a given moment?
Oh, that is so true. That is such a challenge. Maintaining relationships when it's not task focused. Yeah, 100%.
I'll say one more thing about women, Bex, obviously, because I'm an expert on women as well. So I will always, that's my humility, a new book coming out. But what I often say is that basically nature is the same for all of those personalities. So you are a first voice pioneer connector, but the nurture piece, which shapes our behavior, is actually much more conditioned for women. So women are almost taught to be more relational, more empathetic, more caring, more nurturing, less competitive almost. And so therefore, pioneer women often listen to this and go, well, I'm not sure necessarily that's always my experience, Steve, because in my experience, pioneer women usually have already learned how to do a lot of this relational influence. What they haven't had is the permission to truly be a pioneer. So in the sense of going, I often say, if you take a pioneer guardian or a pioneer connector and squash them, you'll usually get kind of the connector. And so they'll focus on the bits that they can actually do. And it's just recognizing that actually there are certain things which still in most nurture of most cultures tell women that they ought and should be. And of course, the vast majority of women are more relational and more nurturing. Therefore, there's pressure that comes with it. So I'm giving you generalization, but I'm actually saying in many ways, most pioneering women, when they hear this, go, I'm not sure necessarily that's all me. And that's often because they've never truly been given the permission to live as a pioneer in the first place. They've had to filter their voice to fit in with what the organisation, or particularly what the cultural oughts and shoulds would be. So Bex, I don't know whether you want to talk to that, but I think that's just important as a kind of finishing caveat, that basically there is a difference in the way that the behaviours of Pioneer looks based on gender and the nurture that they've brought up in.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think when I was growing up as a female first voice pioneer, I was lucky in the sense that my mum is also a pioneer connector, so I had quite a close champion of the female pioneer voice. However, I could never understand why I felt so different to my friends, where I was much more competitive, where I wanted to save the world, where I wanted to dream, and I was like, why? And I wasn't interested in the nurturing side of the relationships at all, and I just couldn't understand why I felt so different. And then understanding that I was a pioneer was like this light bulb moment where I was like, oh my word, it all makes sense now. I get it. I'm not an anomaly of nature. So yeah, just encourage your female pioneers to really kind of use their right hand and be who they were made to be. It's such a liberating feeling.
Yeah, most male pioneers have to learn to be more sensitive and actually connect with other voices. Most female pioneers actually learn how to do the other bit. They need to learn how to have the freedom to be a pioneer. So if you're leading young female pioneers, creating the environment and calling them up to be the pioneer that they are with the skill sets they are, that's one of the ways that you can actually really help and develop those around you as well, for those in positions of leadership. So sorry if this has felt a bit like a therapy session for you, Bex, today, me talking about the Pioneer Connector. But I wish somebody taught me this when I was 25. I mean, most of this, unfortunately, has come out of getting it wrong and upsetting people and hurting people. And pioneers never mean to do that, by the way. It's not we mean to do it. We're unconsciously incompetent until somebody gives us tools and language. And then, of course, we become pretty determined to master whatever we think is important, which is why Voices and much of the resource that Giants developed is just so helpful, because what it does is it means you can build invincible teams. You can build invincible families. You can build invincible relationships. And you can create synergy more than conflict. So if I sound like I'm preaching it now, all I'm saying is this is deeply personal, because most of what we're talking about here is what's come out of a lifetime of learning. And I would say that maturity is helping you make different mistakes to the ones I've already made. So there we go.
So many nuggets of gold would come out of today's session. I've been making notes. I'm like, oh yeah, need to work on that one as well. So thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful. Next week, we are going to be doing the creative voice, the final one in our series of how do creatives really increase their influence. And we'll be tackling both the creative thinker and the creative feeler as well. So if you know any creatives, or you have creatives in your team or your family, then please do come along to watch that. We'll be back here, same time, same place, next Friday. And in the meantime, we hope you have a fantastic week.